Okay. So it's quite nice to have a small group of you here. Welcome to the rigging seminar, which I'm going to basically do exactly what I say here. I'm going to talk about what rigging actually is in the context of skydiving, about how you might get into rigging and how you might proceed to get British skydiving ratings as a rigger. And I'm going to look at why you might do that. And as part of the why you might do that, I'll touch on the question that you raised about why you might not, about why perhaps not a lot of people get into rigging. So that's what I'm going to cover. There's a little bit of information about me here. Basically, I'm not an absolute expert rigger. I'm really passionate about rigging. I'm a parachute rigger, which I'll explain as I go through the talk, is kind of part way through the whole rigging set of qualifications. And I'm really keen on sort of sharing information about this with people. I'm going to skip through things quite quickly so that I hope I'll keep quite a bit of time at the end for just general questions and conversation about some of the stuff I'm going to cover. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what a rigger does, because you're probably aware that it's a bit of a strange term. So if you look up rigging in a dictionary, it gets aligned with sort of sailing ships alongside parachutes. And the construction industry has riggers, and the entertainment industry has riggers. So I'm going to look specifically at rigging in the context of skydiving. But even within the context of skydiving, it's a slippery term. It's used in different ways, especially across different associations. So you might be aware that the USPA ratings that have that title rigger are really quite different than ours. So I'm looking specifically at rigging in the context of British skydiving civilian riggers. And within that context, we can say that a rigger deals with quite a lot. They deal with inspection, repair, maintenance, configuration, design, and manufacture of sports parachuting equipment. So that's quite a large remit for a rigger. And I think a lot of that often gets overlooked when people think about what a rigger does, particularly the manufacturing side. And a rigger, as part of that, has a really wide knowledge and understanding of sports parachuting equipment, its requirements and its limitations. So this means that riggers are really quite fundamental to keeping skydivers jumping, to looking after all of that kit and equipment that keeps us skydivers in the air. And all that tinkering around unseen in back rooms and all that knowledge and expertise that riggers have means that they're often really driving developments in the sport in a way that doesn't often get recognised. So I think the most sort of prominent example would be Bill Booth and the three-ring system. But if you start thinking about it, you can think of lots of examples of innovations in the sport, really significant innovations that have come from riggers. So I would argue, I'm a bit biased, but I would argue that riggers are absolutely fundamental to the sport. And the scope of riggers' knowledge is quite extensive, as indicated by this list. Now, this is just a small selection that I've drawn from the areas that are covered in rigger training. And this goes right down to basic rigger training, which is kind of entry level. And you'll see there's an awful lot that is covered there. From things like how to maintain and use sewing machines and correct stitch patterns, all that kind of thing, to all the nuances of AADs and being aware of all the safety bulletins that come out around skydiving equipment. So there's an awful lot is covered by a rigger's expertise. And a lot of these things are off the radar for your sort of average skydiver. So riggers have this really specialist knowledge that means that they can answer questions such as, can I use any old thread for repairing my canopy? or this piece of webbing here needs replacing, what can I use? Or I think I've got some saltwater damage on my 3 rings, what do I do about it? Riggers are the people who can answer those things. And often the question that people bring to riggers is, can you fix it? This is our key question. And the other one is, if you've just got a minute, can you? And then they follow it with some extraordinary task. So this was a sad case. The person who bought this canopy to me, this was one of my repairs, they asked me could I fix it, but they had that kind of look in their eye that said they already thought the answer was going to be absolutely no, and they were kind of heartbroken. This canopy had like 5 or 6 jumps on it. It had been brand new. They got it snagged on something, and the damage was extensive. This is only one part of the damage. So they tore a line, tore the attachment point, tore the stabiliser, both parts of the stabiliser, top skin, bottom skin. It tore the cell wall, and there were other scuffs and rips all over the canopy, and they kind of, can you fix it? They'd already written it off. And with some patience and my expertise as a rigger and some fabric supplied by the manufacturers, I was able to give it back to them and say, here you are. And it was the kind of repair that you had to look quite hard to see that the canopy had been repaired. And so that's a really important part of what riggers do. And for me as a rigger, it's one of the real joys of having that rating is being able to go, here you go, yes, I fixed it, or I'll give it a try. And being able to keep somebody jumping. And occasionally, this was a few years ago, occasionally this person, I just get a random phone call or a text message that goes, thank you. And it's a really nice part of being a rigger. And there's a real satisfaction when you've given something back and you know you can be really proud of that repair, that actually is really good. And my rigging mentor often talks about, the best work is when nobody can tell you've done the work. And it's an odd thing about being a rigger, is that you're aiming to be really completely unnoticed when you're repairing things. And riggers also have a really specialist eye, particularly for knowing when something can keep on being used, when something needs repairing or replacing, and when something absolutely should be grounded. And a lot of that, it's not about sort of black and white decisions, but there's lots of grey areas. So when it comes to whether a damaged line needs replacing or a whole line set needs replacing, it's often thinking about, well, what kind of line is it? What is it used for? What are the consequences if the line breaks? What are the risks there? And then building that bigger, nuanced picture to make a decision on what then happens to that piece of kit. So alongside having this kind of expert knowledge and being able to fix things, riggers can also manufacture things. And as I said, I think this is often something that's overlooked by you general skydivers, that if you have a cutaway, you can actually go to a rigger to make you things. And that depends on their rating. So say you have a cutaway, you lose everything, you can go to a parachute rigger who can make you new risers, new D-bag, new bridle, new pilot chute, new toggles. But if you need a new free bag, it has to be an advanced rigger. Or in this case, this was made by a parachute rigger and then signed off by a rigger examiner. So that's another important part of what riggers do and what it means to be a rigger. And riggers can also manufacture what we call ancillary equipment. And this is one of my favourite things about rigging, alongside complicated patching. So this is a little project of mine last year. I was trying to build an interchangeable streamer system so that I could rock up at a drop zone and I could have the colour streamers for me and other jumpers depending on what event was being celebrated. And it became quite complicated because I'm a CF jumper, so I was thinking, okay, you're in a canopy formation, a belly band is good with your streamers in there and you sort of throw them between your legs, that means they're snag proof. So that's this bag here. But then I wanted something else that was a bit more grand. So this system here is a leg-mounted streamer pouch, and the carabiner goes up to your risers. But of course, if you've got it fixed to your leg and you've got it fixed to your risers, if you've got to cut away, you're in a world of trouble. So then I had to think that through and build a cutaway system, which is that little grey tag there, that is single-handed and can be used by either hand to instantly sort of separate the whole system in half. And it's that kind of problem solving and research and development that I think is really interesting as a rigger. But it's not the only thing that's interesting about being a rigger. It's that kind of, again, an informed decision making where you're thinking through risks and you've got the information to make decisions around that. And, you know, testing those things out is a really important part of that. And I know I'm not the only rigger who tests things out, and before I've even landed, I'm thinking, oh yeah, but version 2 is going to be so much better, and I'm going to make this change and that change. This kind of endless process. For me, and for other riggers that I talk to, there is this sort of possibility through rigging of constantly pushing your knowledge and constantly pushing your understanding of parachute equipment that's really appealing. But if I'm honest with you, it's also really frustrating. There's an awful lot of unpicking that goes on in rigging, and there are bins in rigging rooms that are full of material that has been miscut or misaligned, and it's sort of things like thinking through the shrinkage of material when you're sewing maybe old ZP onto new ZP, or, you know, trying to reconstruct a D-bag to the manufacturer's specifications and you get it 5 mil out on one side, and sort of it's being able to work through those difficulties is important. So it can be frustrating, if I'm honest. So to round off my skip through what being a rigger is, I really want to emphasise that there isn't one way of being a British skydiving rigger. It can be many, many different things. And what I've got here is just a few thoughts from different British skydiving riggers, from really entry level to sort of top end riggers, of what it is they do, because riggers all tend to have their own specialism, things that they are really interested in. So I love complex canopy patching. I'm really not interested in changing line sets. I love manufacturing sort of bespoke things for displays and that kind of thing. But there's a whole range of things that riggers do, and lots of possibilities there to kind of make your own area within rigging. Some riggers work at a drop zone, you know, solely at one drop zone. Some riggers work at a drop zone and have their own facilities, and some riggers work entirely independent of a drop zone. There are some riggers out there that have a converted garage or a whole grand rigging loft of their own, and some work from a spare room. There are even some that have mobile setups that travel around to different drop zones or events. So lots of possibilities. It can be a casual hobby, it can be a full-time career, or anything in between. In fact, talking to lots of different riggers makes it really clear that for most people it's not about getting into rigging because it gives you financial rewards within the sport. It is about developing your passion, your interests in the sport, and that's why I think a lot of riggers end up with their kind of niche area. The thing that they're really interested in becomes the focus of their rigging. And this isn't an extensive list. I could have given you a whole presentation on different specialisms of riggers, but this is just to give you a taste of that. But I want to move quite quickly on to talk about how you become a rigger. Now, you might not be able to see all of this very well from where you are, but this is available on British Skydiving's website. And it is a lovely flowchart that talks you through all of the rigger ratings and what they involve, how you get put forward for one, and what each rating entitles you to do. Because it's just the same as every other aspect of British Skydiving, there's a series of ratings that you go through that give you sort of increasing responsibility. And we have exactly the same thing with rigging. So it really starts with getting your approved packing certificate, which I'm presuming quite a few people in here will have. You know, that ability to pack mains, to configure them. And you get your approved packing certificate and you use that, you practice packing. You have to have that certificate for 18 months before you can go for your advanced packer rating, your AP rating. And your AP rating is about being able to inspect and pack and configure reserves. So it really builds on that sort of initial packing of mains. And across those two qualifications, those two ratings, you build up quite a lot of expertise just in handling kit and what to look for. And that's a really good basis for then pursuing that into your rigger ratings. And at the other end of the rigger process, we have advanced rigger and rigger examiner. And an advanced rigger can undertake any work on reserve or main canopies. They can undertake harness work, they can refit chest straps, they can fit belly bands on. And as part of the advanced rigger rating, you have to make your own skydiving container. So that's quite a big thing. And rigger examiner is exactly what the label suggests. They can examine all the other riggers. So what I want to do for the next couple of minutes is to really focus in on the middle bit. The bit that's sort of entry level into rigger. Once you started packing, how do you get into being a rigger? Because I think that's probably the most useful part to talk about in a seminar like this. So once you have your advanced packer rating, once you can pack reserves, you can then move on to your basic rigger training. And the basic rigger training is kind of like an apprenticeship. It gives you all of the experience you need to go on and sit your parachute rigger exam. And the parachute rigger exam is a 5-day course and it's really intense. You, through your basic rigger training, you will make specified components. There's a syllabus that sets out a list of components you have to be able to make. You spend your basic rigger training working on those, getting really good at building them, and then you take a set of them to your parachute rigger exam. You then sit a written test, and if you pass a written test, you then remake all of those components, but in those intense exam conditions. And they have to be to certain specifications, so you might be given some things to copy, other things you'll be given a manufacturer's diagram, and you make those things. And you will also do a line replacement and a complicated canopy patching. So it's usually a top skin, bottom skin, and cell wall. And you do all that in these exam conditions, so it's really quite intense when you get to parachute rigger. So the basic rigger process is all about setting you up for that, so that you're ready to go and do that. So I'm going to focus in a little bit more, give you a bit more insight into the basic rigger training, because I think this is often what puts people off. They look at this and think, that just looks impossible. So you'll notice already we've got method 1 and method 2. It's like, well, what's that about? Why have you got 2 choices here? Do you have to do both methods? Do you do one? We don't really have that in any of our other progression systems. So you choose one or the other. And method 1, so I did method 2, so I'm a bit biased. So I've asked some other people who've been through method 1, and I've asked some rigger examiners as well on what their thoughts are on the 2 different methods. So hopefully I can give you quite an unbiased view. The method 1 is really good in the sense that it's front-loaded. You do this 40-hour course. And that talks you through all the syllabus. It will introduce you to all the components, how you make them, what's expected, and you'll get a little bit of practice. And then after that, you go away and you have 160 hours, but I think you can do it in less. A rigger examiner was telling me yesterday that it doesn't have to be 160 hours. So you'll do that extra work on your own, occasionally meeting with a supervisor so that they can check what you're doing and answer questions for you. And that should set you up really well for going and doing your parachute rigger course. And one of the really good things about that is when you do that 40-hour basic rigger course, you're in a rigging room with other riggers. So it's very much like those exam conditions. And you'll have your rigger examiners who are teaching you, but you'll also have potentially other candidates for advanced rigger or parachute rigger alongside you. So you can have lots of great conversations and really build that experience. Method 2, you don't have that intense course at the beginning. You find yourself a supervisor and then you make a commitment to each other that you are going to undertake that training with them. So they will coach you through each of those components and supervise you making those things. So it's not that one is a shortcut or an easier route, it's just that they're two different routes and you can think what suits you and what suits your potential supervisor. And one of the things that people often flag up about method 1 is that the courses they are always held in the winter. So downtime for most drop zones and jumpers, which can be a really good way of sort of getting the big fix of your learning in then, and then you do your hours practice after that at a time that suits you. Whereas one of the bonuses of method 2 is that it's much more flexible and you can structure it around what suits you, and it's this kind of ongoing learning through contact with your supervisor. So a few things to think about there in terms of which route might be good if you're thinking about rigging. There are, I think, a couple of things that constantly come up when people are thinking about going down either of those routes. First of all, the onus is on the person who wants to get into rigging to find a supervisor. It's not down to supervisors to go out and find candidates. And that's often a stumbling block for people. It's kind of, well, how on earth do I find a rigging supervisor? And then the second stumbling block is this idea that you need to be able to access rigging facilities to do all this practice. And they often seem really out of reach for most skydivers. So I think that comes back to your question of why don't people get into rigging? You know, these I think are key things. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time talking about those. Finding a supervisor isn't necessarily as difficult as it sounds because you have to go through your advanced packing qualification first. So that will put you in touch with somebody who can supervise you. And if for any reason they can't, maybe they don't have the time, or maybe there just isn't that sort of connection there, then they should be able to direct you to somebody else in that pool of riggers who can supervise you. But maybe that doesn't work out for you. Then you can think, well, all drop zones have kit. So all drop zones have a rigger, maybe on site, maybe it's somebody remote, maybe it's somebody who comes to visit with a mobile setup, maybe they send their kit somewhere. So you can find out how that works and make contact with a rigger in that way. The supervisor has to be at least a parachute rigger rating, and to have had that, I think it's for 2 years, and they need to have known you for 6 months. So you have time to build up that relationship and make sure you get on, because that's a key part of this. So, you know, you might not find a supervisor instantly, but if you decide that you want to go down the rigging route, then there's lots of ways that you might do that. And if you're at Headcorn, then like myself and Giuseppe, then we're really lucky. Our CI is a rigger and he's really generous with his rigging room, and he let me go in there. I never wanted to become a rigger. I just wanted to go and use the rigging room and tinker about and make things and play with things. But somehow a few years later I was going for my rigger rating. But I know that not all drop zones have that. but find out who does the rigging at your drop zone. Talk to them. Maybe they won't be your supervisor, but they might recommend somebody else who is. And if that's the case, then probably method 1 would be better for you, where you go and get that intense input, and then you just occasionally need to meet your rigger, your supervisor. You occasionally take them a pile of things and they look at them all and give you feedback and sign you off on things. So, yes, finding a supervisor, it's possible. And accessing rigging facilities. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that you have to have it all set up from the outset. For all the riggers I talk to, it's a very slow process. Most of them spend years accumulating their machines and their tools. And as part of that process, you learn how to use the machines and tools properly, and you learn how to maintain them, and you learn how to fix them when they go wrong. It's amazing the amount of ways that a sewing machine can go wrong. So you need to be able to fix it. So that takes a lot of time. And most people start off with a domestic sewing machine at home, a 20U. If anyone is interested, look out for a 20U. It'll do most of the things you need it to do.
What make is that?
It's a Singer 20U. Yeah, it's a kind of standard machine because it will do all your straight stitch, your zigzag, your bar tacks. So get a machine like that and an old decommissioned Canopy. You can do all the patching practice you like. You can practice changing lines. You can, practice all sorts of repairs, practice replacing attachment points, all of those kind of things. And that's all you need to be able to do. All the equipment you need to be able to do that. So, think of it as being a slow process of building up the expertise alongside the equipment that you need. So, I'm going to move on into why get into rigging. It's a question that comes up a lot. Why? Because with skydivers, it's about getting out there and jumping, and if you're rigging, you're in a back room, you're on the ground. So, I did a very quick check, and it seems that around 9 people over the past 2 or 3 years have qualified as as parachute riggers. We're talking a really small niche within the sport. It doesn't appeal to everybody. I'll be really honest about that. And that's not necessarily because of things like this that put barriers there to entry. It's never going to appeal to the majority of skydivers. And I think that's partly because it appeals to people with particular characteristics. And I think the key characteristic is curiosity. And several riggers mentioned this to me. Several rigger examiners said that this is what they look for. When they have conversations with people who want a supervisor, they are looking for people who have that genuine curiosity about kit. That really flags up to them that someone's going to be a good candidate. So if you're thinking that rigging might be a good route for you, something that interests you, this is my little self-test for you. So if you look at these questions and you think, I really don't care which part of Velcro wears out the quickest, really don't care, probably rigging isn't for you. If you're thinking, didn't even know that's what those 2 parts were called, how interesting, which wears out quicker, is it significantly different, what makes the difference? Probably you want to look a bit more at rigging. And the same with these other questions. So think to yourselves what the answers might be, and we'll come back to them at the end. And yeah, you can use it to kind of gauge how likely are you to become a rigger in the near future. So most modern mains have cascaded lines. So why do some reserves have single suspension lines? Second question, Velcro comes in 2 parts, pile and hook, also known as male and female sometimes. Which wears out the quickest? And then thirdly, what is generally thought to be the main cause of damage and deterioration to parachuting equipment, especially canopies? I'll leave you with those questions. and just flag up some other sort of characteristics that I think are really key to people who become riggers and why they become riggers. And that is having a lot of patience, really being able to work through something that's really difficult, you know, lots of unpicking because one stitch went off the edge of the patch, or because you've made a whole bridle and then you realise that there was a fault in the square weave that you used and you had to scrap the whole thing. You know, it's that kind of patience that it really tests, and the same with having a kind of tenacity when it comes to problem solving. Okay, one thing doesn't work, what else can you do? What other materials can you do? How can you get around a particular problem? And resilience, just being able to just walk away from something. My thing is having a cup of coffee. Giuseppe at Head Cornwall see how often I stomp out the rigging room, have a cup of coffee in the sunshine and go back in. And it's that sort of being able to go back and go, no, I am going to make this work. I'm going to solve the problem. I think these are key things that bring people into rigging. And if this kind of resonates with you, then you probably want to look at rigging. You'll find it very rewarding. So I don't want to leave us on a negative note about rigging. So I asked, again, a few riggers, from entry-level riggers to rigger examiners, what are their highlights about rigging? What really works for them when it comes to rigging? And this is a little synopsis of the list I got back. And I identify with those a lot. It was really nice when one of them told me this story about patching a 50-jump-old canopy. This one had been eaten by cows in a field. It's like, oh no, these poor jumpers with these new canopies that are getting destroyed. And I thought, yeah, this is really where I am with it too. It is getting paid to develop your skills. So that jumper is willing to pay, you know, adequately for your patching expertise, and it's really rewarding giving it back to them. But you're also getting paid to develop your own skills as part of that. So, yeah, this is just a really short synopsis of some of those things that other riggers talk about. And the building and jumping your own rig, I mean, it's fantastic, you know, that rigging can give you that opportunity. It's not something that many skydivers get to do. So I've got some top tips from riggers, again from entry level basic riggers up to rigger examiners. For any of you who are thinking that this might be something that is appealing to you, these are some top tips. From sort of basic things about going and speaking with a rigger and finding out what they do, to speaking to someone who's just qualified and see what it was like for them going through the process. I think this is a key one. Don't think you're going to get rich quick or at all as a rigger. If you want to get rich dealing with kit, stay on the packing mat. It's far more lucrative. You earn a lot more per hour than you will as a rigger. But then there are some riggers out there, so Alan Hewitt, you might have gone to his presentation this Expo or last year, where he's really making a successful career as a rigger and making it really lucrative. So there are always exceptions to this. I left this one in its entirety. It's a bit long, but I think it makes a really key point. So if you're becoming interested in doing bits of work on your own kit or just tinkering around with stuff, it's this rigger's recommending that you do the rigging course, the basic rigger course, just to push your own understanding. And if you decide that rigging isn't for you, you still get that advantage of knowing your kit, which keeps you safer. You know, that understanding of kit just keeps the sport safer. So all these slides will go online, so you can always have a look back at these. But I just want to move on quite quickly and just sort of end by noting that there is some admin to rigging. You have to be quite good with paperwork. You have to keep a log of all your rigging because everything needs to be traced back to you. You need to keep up with safety bulletins, all those kind of things. And if you are interested, these are some of the things that are on the British Skydiving website, and it's really worth having a nosy through them. So here we've got the syllabus for each course. These will take you through exactly what's required for each course and what the limitations are of each rating. And rigging manuals are definitely worth looking at. You know, you'll learn lots just by looking at the rigging manuals that are out there. So that's my really quick skip through the what, why and how of rigging for British Skydiving rigger ratings. And I'm quite keen to field any questions. I'm just going to finish by saying a thank you to all the riggers who contributed their insights to my presentation, and a particular thank you to the riggers who've inspired me and supported me and helped me through my own rigger journey. So, any questions?
The exam to become a rigger, is it a timed exam?
The parachute rigger exam.
Yeah.
Did everybody hear
I don't
that?
think we need that.
Yeah.
It's food course. Oh, sorry.
Do you want to ask it again then? Sorry.
The rigger exam, is there a time constraint on it? Is there a time limit?
Yes, there is. So the parachute rigger exam is a 5-day course, and you're given all that stuff to do within the 5 days. And there will be start points to the day and end points to the day when the rigging room is open and closed. You can do your unpicking outside of that time. But yes, it is timed. And sometimes people don't get to make all of the components. And the patching and the line replacement are pass-fail, so you absolutely have to do those and pass them, whereas all of the components, so you make a pilot chute, a static line bag, toggles, there's a whole lot of things you make, you will get marks for those out of 100. So there are certain things that you prioritise within that time to make sure that you get everything done to get the maximum marks. But they talk you through that at the beginning.
But it's not like you've got 2 hours to make a harness, go.
No, not really, but kind of. So the parachute rigger course, which is the first one you sit, you will have that list of components and those 5 days to do all of that, and then it's down to you. So through your basic rigger, you will have worked out, it takes me 3 hours to make a pilot chute. It takes me 2 hours to make a pair of toggles. So when you get that list of things for the parachute rigger rating, the parachute rigger course, you will then sort of think, okay, this is how I'm apportioning my time to make sure I can get everything done. And it might be that you say, right, I've got to get this bit done in the first day, and I've got to get my patching done in half a day. So it's down to each individual to think about how they manage the time.
The AAD Visual Prize. The AAD Visual Prize. Oh.
Is it another 20 minutes?
No, it's now.
Prize.
Is it?
Yeah.
Tried several times.
Okay, so the building a harness is when you go for your advanced rigger rating,
that was
and
just an
that's
example.
completely independent. I know somebody at the moment who's taken 3 years building theirs. Yeah, but yeah, for the parachute rigger, you've built enough experience to know how long it's going to take you to make things. And also because there's several people going through exams in the same rigging room, you've got to juggle who's using what machines as part of that and who's using the cutting table and the hot knife. So it's kind of lots of management, good time management.
So Mary, thank you for your presentation, very interesting. So the first step, if I understood right, is to become an advanced packer.
Your approved packing certificate, then an advanced packer, yes.
Advanced packer. So to do that, you'll have to find a parachute rigger that will supervise you in doing that.
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes. Yeah, so this bit here, to become an advanced packer, you need to be involved in skydiving for at least 18 months by that point, and then you need to do your advanced packer course, which is generally run by a parachute rigger or above, and they'll talk you through the requirements of reserve packing. So that will be things like inspection, what we're actually looking for in terms of faults. I think that's a really key part of your advanced packer training, is actually understanding what is a damaged connector link. How do you identify one? When does a line need replacing? When do you ground something? You know, how big a hole is too big in something? So it's good for that. Yeah, they'll teach you that. It's usually a few days, and you'll go through some packing under their supervision. And then you have to, I think it's 20 pack jobs, I think, within a certain amount of time that you do supervised. So you have to keep going back doing these pack jobs. And then you do your advanced packer exam, which is a written exam, and I think it's 4 pack jobs over 2 days, and they should be different systems. The idea is you're not getting that qualification by always packing the same set of kit, but you need as wide an experience as possible, which is another thing that makes it really good experience, because you're learning so much looking across all different kinds of kit. You really start to get a sense of why things are the way they are. I'm just...
So these advanced packer courses, are they scheduled? Or
if you want to do an advanced packer course, the general recommendation is to get in touch with the British Skydiving office, and they'll let you know when one's happening. But Giuseppe, I know you're a headcorn jumper, so I'm just going to direct you to Pete Sizer. He runs advanced packer courses every winter.
At Headcorn?
At Headcorn, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well worth doing. I did my advanced packer rating. This is kind of the story of my rigging and packing, really. No intention of becoming an advanced packer. I just wanted to understand my own reserve and be able to pack for myself. But then you kind of come out of it with this understanding and this kind of competency. So just the kinds of things that you learn through your advanced packer rating. You might not have noticed, but this free bag, on the bridle, it has these little pockets that catch air. And this is something that's specific to rigging innovations. They don't do it anymore, but they used to build these extra little air-grabbing pockets on the free bag bridle, with the idea that if the pilot chute, the spring-loaded pilot chute didn't work for any reason, that you've got this wide bridle on your free bag, and then these extra little pockets would just give it that little bit more chance of opening. And it was learning that kind of thing through packing lots of different reserves as part of my AP course that got me really interested in it. That there isn't just this one way of doing anything in terms of our kit, but you're kind of thinking through, how do I make this work the best it can in the worst of situations? So it's just a little example of the kind of thing you pick up in the AP course. So yes, give Pete a shout. For anyone else who's interested in AP, when you've got Karen back at Langer now, and Noel's still here, isn't he? Yeah. So there, you know, there are people spread about who run the AP courses, and even if you stop there with AP, it's just fantastic knowledge as a skydiver.
Sorry, I have a question. If you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you. So from that advanced rigger rating to your current rating, how much time did it take you?
From the advanced packer, I'm going to go right back to my first slide to answer your question. Okay, so I got my advanced packer rating in 2012. So I've been skydiving for 6 years. I'd worked as casually worked as a packer, being quite interested in kit. Really, since I started skydiving, I learnt to pack very early on. 6 years later, went for my advanced packer. And then 3 years after that, started my basic rigger training through that second route. So I, again, you know, really lucky, in touch with Pete Sizer. He thought I was a good candidate, encouraged me to start logging the work I was doing. But it took me 2 years to go through my basic rigger course because I was a bit slow at doing stuff because I kept remaking everything and was never happy with anything I'd made. And so from my advanced packer rating, it was 5 years later I got my rigger rating, but I wasn't in a rush to do anything because I didn't see it as becoming a career. I was just doing it for the fun of it, and I'm not full-time in skydiving. I have a full-time job and family and stuff that's always distracting me. So I was quite happy to do it slowly. You could do it much quicker if you wanted to, but I kind of like that journey. I'm a real learning addict, and I liked being able to absorb stuff and just have lots of conversations with my supervising rigger and other riggers as well. I've been really lucky that I've been welcome in other people's rigging rooms and been able to get really geeky about it.
So I can see like all the learning that you do on the advanced packing course, and then if you did method 1 for basic rigging, you know, they're both courses which teach you, but you need like at least 18 months in the sport before you can do an AP course. Before that, like, what can I do just to generally upskill myself about learning the kit and the other skills, like, that would be helpful?
That's a fantastic question. And I think there's a lot you can do. You don't need to wait for these things to be available to you. So just get involved with packing. If you've got your approved packing certificate, try and put yourself in a situation where you can pack lots of different kit rather than packing for one person or yourself and one other person. Offer to pack some club kit. You know, pack static line kit and the stuff that they use for AFF. Whenever you see somebody in the packing shed with a system that looks a bit unfamiliar, ask questions. Have a right nosy about things. If someone's packing their pilot chute a bit differently than you do, ask people about why they're doing it. Don't take it for granted that they know or that they're making good decisions, but just kind of keep that curiosity going and try and get a sense of the kind of the difference that's out there. If there are accuracy jumpers at your drop zone or canopy formation jumpers, you know, they do really different things with their kit. So look at what they're doing, talk to them about it, and most jumpers will be really happy to talk to somebody who is genuinely curious about kit. There's nothing to say that you can't go into a rigging room and have conversations with a rigger just because there are stipulations about when you go for these ratings. So when you're having your reserve packed, most advanced packers I know will offer somebody who comes for a repack the chance to actually use their system to deploy the reserve. It's amazing how few skydivers take that up. They just really don't want to know. They do not want to see that reserve at all. But then there's the odd one who will go, oh yeah, you know, and then once they've deployed it and they've seen how far that pilot chute's gone behind them, they'll want to have a nosy at it and they'll want to see the difference in that bridle. So be one of those jumpers and you'll be surprised how much you learn. Yeah.
We need to get set up for the next seminar.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mary, one more question.
Right.
Is British Skydiving, as an organisation, concerned about the lack of riggers and the lack of riggers coming through? And if so, is there a drive to sort that out?
That is a very interesting question. So in my experience, it depends who you talk to. So just in preparation for this seminar, I've been speaking to a lot of rigger examiners and advanced riggers, and I've got different responses to that. Some people have said, we're really short of riggers, we're especially short of people coming through at the bottom end. And some people have said, no, we've got enough. We're never going to have a lot, but we're fine. So a bit of a mixed bag in response to the first part of your question. And in response to the second part, British Skydiving doing anything about it, I think that's partly why I'm here and why Lucy's been doing her packing thing, and then Alan is doing kind of the other end of rigging, the super experienced end, to highlight that. So I did a talk similar to this at the Uncover Your Potential event last year. And then they invited me to come and do this off the back of that, because that got a couple of people into rigging. And so in British Skydiving, there was a sense of, well, this is really useful, really flagging up how you get into rigging. So I think maybe there are or there aren't enough riggers, but British Skydiving is very keen on just opening it up more to members, to making it more transparent how you get into it. Yeah. We need to move out of here for the next presentation, but I'm around. I'm off to a competitors meeting, and then I'm around the rest of the evening. So come and
Don't feel
come
the
and.
need to leave. We just